This is Green Street, the Environmental Health Show, greenstreetnews.org, Patti and Doug Wood, and our worldwide team of scientists, medical professionals, authors, reporters, and others here every week to bring you up to date on what is going on that you need to know about to keep yourself and your family safe and healthy in this increasingly toxic world. Welcome back. Last week on the show, Patti read a news article about how the Trump administration wants to reclassify certain types of plastic recycling as manufacturing to get around regulations on air emissions. That's because burning plastic, which is basically what the plastic producers are doing when they talk about recycling, is an incredibly dirty and inefficient process that uses a boatload of energy and produces a lot of very toxic material. Today on Green Street, we're going to revisit an interview we did a few months ago with Dr. Veena Singla, who's one of the nation's top experts on plastic recycling, because everyone needs to understand what they're talking about when you hear about plastic recycling. That's coming up right after this week's news from the environmental health world. Patti, what do you got for us this week?
Well, this is a really good article, something that I've been thinking about for a long time. This is a new review that uncovers how microplastics infiltrate plants, raising food security concerns. The review, published in New Contaminants, demonstrates that microplastics and their chemical additives like phthalates and UV stabilizers cause oxidative stress, block nutrient uptake, and suppress photosynthesis in plants, with a meta-analysis suggesting that microplastic exposure could reduce global yields of staple crops like rice, wheat, and maize by up to 360 million metric tons annually.
We're talking about plastic that's floating around in the air that gets
deposited,
lands on the plants.
100%.
Yikes.
And it's also in the irrigation, in the water.
Yeah.
That they're irrigating with. Okay.
Sure.
So these are losses that are comparable to climate change impacts. And beyond direct plant toxicity, microplastics alter soil microbial communities and can transfer through food webs when contaminated plant tissues are consumed by herbivores, insects, and humans.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the UN conference on reducing plastic was a bust.
Dead in the water.
Yeah.
Dead in the water.
Not going to do it. We're not going to stop producing, more and more plastic every year. It's very, very concerning. So it's going to begin to diminish the amount of yield we get from farming.
100%. And even in backyard gardens. And I'm going to talk about that next. So retired NBC reporter Brian Thompson saw something on Facebook that really shook him. It showed a photo of someone's front lawn covered in at least 2 inches of what at first glanced looked like pristine white snow.
Oh, I know what this is.
It was not.
It was plastic.
It was plastic dust from a nearby construction site where workers had been cutting up plastic building materials out in the open.
Oh my gosh.
Construction in Jersey Shore towns is booming, and plastics are increasingly replacing traditional construction materials like wood, stone, and concrete. Now, 16 towns along the Jersey Shore have passed ordinances addressing microplastic pollution from construction sites. The approved and proposed ordinances prohibit contractors from blowing debris, dust, or plastic contaminants into streets or storm drains, and requires contractors to use tarps, saw hoods, and vacuum attachments to contain the plastic sawdust.
Patty, every house today is
I know. We always talk about plastic house
it's
from
the
bottom up.
It's the insulation. It's the siding. It's the
roof.
Plumbing. It's the roof. It's everything.
And then interior, it's the walls. It's the vinyl flooring. It's the doors. It's everything are made of plastic today.
Yeah.
Most experts agree a better way to address the problem would be to start at the source and encourage or require the use of non-plastic materials whenever possible.
Yeah, but they're cheap. And they're easy, and that's why we use them.
Yeah. The people cutting the material themselves, though, are immediately at risk, right?
Sure,
I mean, they're out there just breathing in, and they're
Yeah.
bending over their table saws, and they're breathing in the plastic dust.
I mean, when a saw goes through that plastic, there's the pieces you can see,
right,
and there's the pieces that you can't even see because they're so tiny,
That's right?
So you're breathing those in.
100%. And remember, we were just talking about plastics in plants and vegetables?
Yeah.
Well, what about microplastic dust falling on neighbors' vegetable gardens? You want to talk about that?
No.
We don't want to talk about that.
I mean, it's just
But I know that it's a problem. I know that the construction industry is using plastic. We keep talking about how developers, they buy an older home that has enough land where they can subdivide it and put in 2 plastic houses.
Yep. Take down the old house, put up 2 crummy new houses made of plastic.
Yep. I have to quickly add one more piece of news.
Sure.
So wildfire smoke is responsible for tens of thousands of deaths each year and will do more harm to U.S. residents by mid-century than any other threat driven by climate change, including extreme heat.
Wow.
Yeah. The study, which was published in the journal Nature, found that each year, on average, wildfire smoke is causing more than 41,400 deaths, or more than would be normally expected without smoke given the demographics of the U.S. That figure is more than twice what was previously recognized in other studies. By mid-century, the study's authors expect that number to grow by an additional 26,500 to 30,000 deaths as human-caused climate change worsens and the risk of wildfires igniting increases.
Wow.
Yep. Small particles in wildfire smoke penetrate into the lungs and can circulate in the bloodstream, increasing risk for lung cancer and other chronic lung diseases. This is, it's a big, big study, but it's really, really important, and it offers a stark vision of an increasingly smoke-choked nation. Decades of work to clean up industrial U.S. air pollution through the Clean Air Act is being undone as fires in the western United States and Canada send plumes of smoke into the atmosphere that spread across the landscape. Dr. Joel Kaufman, a University of Washington professor of medicine, epidemiology, and environmental health sciences who studies air pollution, said, quote, "Wildfire smoke is beginning to turn back the clock on our air pollution levels. This is an emerging hazard and is one of the few things that can probably be realistically laid at the foot of climate change."
Gee whiz.
Yeah, I mean, there was an assumption that burning wood was less toxic, right?
Well, you smell
wood fires, and people have, campsites, and they love the wood smoke and everything.
Yeah.
But these results imply, if anything, that wildfire smoke may be more toxic, particularly when that wildfire burns through buildings, cars, and other human-produced materials.
Yeah, because
back
they're
to
made
plastics.
out of plastic. I was just going to say.
Back to plastics.
When you burn plastic, you get dioxin.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. You can't avoid it.
Is there anything more toxic than dioxin?
No, I think it's one of the most toxic things in the world,
yes,
right?
Man-made.
Terrific. All right. Thanks, Patty.
You're welcome. The plastics industry is in trouble. People around the world are beginning to understand that they've been had. The notion that we can keep making and consuming plastic at a fantastic rate and never have to pay the actual price is turning out to be a fairy tale, or a nightmare, depending on how you look at it. So now that our world is awash in plastic, what are we going to do about it? Can technology save us? Can the new technologies of advanced recycling being promoted by the plastics industry really be the answer? To find out, Doug and I spoke with Dr. Veena Singla, an adjunct assistant professor of environmental health at the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University. For years, Dr. Singla has been studying plastic recycling and sorting out the spin from the facts. We spoke with her earlier this week, and we asked her to start with a little background. Here's our interview.
My path to doing this work in environmental health science and policy was not a straight road, I would say. I've always loved science. Ever since I was a little kid, I was doing experiments like, those silica gel packets that come in products like to keep them dry and it says do not eat. I'm like, what's going to happen if I eat it? Let's find out. I'll take some notes. Nothing happened. So
You didn't actually eat it, did you?
Of course I did.
Oh my God. Okay.
Sometimes you're your own best subject. So I've always had a penchant for science, and in graduate school, I studied developmental and cellular biology. I realized kind of partway through grad school that I loved science, I loved research, and especially how the science I was doing might be able to make a more immediate impact in the world and on people's lives. So I've spent the last decade or so between nonprofits like the Natural Resources Defense Council and academia, but always with this focus on how can we use the most current scientific principles and data to make better decisions in our policies in government and more broadly to protect people's health, especially people who are most impacted by environmental pollution and toxic chemicals.
The most vulnerable being, I would imagine, children, women who are pregnant. Those are generally the
Right.
target.
And people with immune system,
Yeah,
disorders, that kind of
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, so when we think about who's susceptible, who's most impacted, when we kind of think about there's intrinsic or biological vulnerability or susceptibility, which you both just identified, right? Children, because they're growing and developing, their systems are immature, they don't process chemicals the same way adults do. People who might have pre-existing diseases or conditions, so that's intrinsic. Then there's extrinsic sources of susceptibility or vulnerability when people are made vulnerable by factors outside of their own biology. So this would be, for example, someone who lives in Cancer Alley and is surrounded by industrial pollution and has air pollution, cancer-causing chemicals hundreds of times above anywhere else in the US. There's not access to fresh and healthful foods. Maybe there's not a safe place for kids to play outside. So these are extrinsic factors that are making people more vulnerable to the impacts of pollution and toxic chemicals.
So it would be great to segue into the attempt to deal with our plastic crisis, right? And that industry that is saying that they can recycle plastic in several different ways, incineration and chemical recycling and plastic to fuel, which is all, mixed up together, right? What's happening with these industries that are trying to deal with our plastics crisis and creating more pollution and more cancer and other things in their wake?
So I think the first point that's really important for people to understand is that plastics are a fossil fuel product. A lot of people don't know that where plastics come from, what they're made of, is all fossil fuels. In the US, it's fossil gas primarily, but in many places, oil, coal, fossil gas, these are what is used to create plastics. So there's very close ties between fossil fuel companies and chemical companies and plastics companies. Altogether, I like to call it the petrochemical industry because fossil fuel companies extract fossil fuels and refine them. Chemical companies take those materials, they might refine and process them further to make chemicals, and those ultimately become plastics. So that's really important context for this whole discussion, because the industry is looking for somewhere else to put its fossil fuels. They have a lot of huge investments and sunk costs in fossil fuel infrastructure. So they're really betting on plastics and petrochemicals as the growth area and market for fossil fuels, as we're burning less fossil fuels to generate power in transportation and buildings, et cetera. So part of that is there's a problem that the public knows there's a plastic pollution problem. There's been quite intense public scrutiny of plastic pollution, whether that's ocean, marine plastic pollution and impacts on wildlife, whether that's microplastics and people's concern for how much plastics they're eating or ingesting and what their families are exposed to. So the problem with the industry's plan of, well, we're going to put fossil fuels into plastics, that's our growth area, is the public is really pushing back on that, saying we have too much plastic. We can't manage it. It's everywhere, and it's harming our environment, and it's harming us. So the next iteration then of the industry's plan is to talk about, well, don't worry. we can manage the plastic waste. We have this new form of recycling, advanced recycling, chemical recycling, molecular recycling, chemically advanced molecular recycling, many different names that they call it. I think my favorite is plastics renewal.
Oh boy.
That's a new
Okay.
one.
Renewal, okay.
Yes. Because for many decades, since the 80s, the plastics industry has said recycling's the answer to
Yeah.
plastic pollution. And for a while that was really focused on conventional or traditional or mechanical recycling. It's called all of those names. And that's where you take plastic, you sort it by type. So I think many people have seen the resin codes on plastic products. It kind of looks like a chasing arrows recycling symbol with a number in it. So that indicates some of the different types of plastic. So you need to sort them by the different types, clean, wash them, and then grind it up and make new plastic pellets, and you can melt those and make new plastic products.
They actually call it the recycling code, right? That was the name that they like to call it. But
Yeah,
it's not really that, is it?
it's quite misleading in the sense that just because there's that number there, it doesn't mean that it is recyclable, or that it would actually be recycled. I
Yeah.
think there's industry documents that have been revealed that it's kind of intentionally misleading to people, because having people believe that the plastics can be and will be recycled is key to making people think it's okay to
Yep.
keep using and buying plastics the way that we have been. So
Yeah.
this chemical recycling new campaign by industry is just another iteration or version of their recycling message that they've been trying to sell for a long time. But now it's just with this new flavor of we have these technologies that are going to solve the problem. So that mechanical recycling, which I described, it just mechanically kind of grinds up plastic. For the small amount of plastic that's recycled today, it's not a lot, there's some, that's done by mechanical recycling. Now, chemical recycling, one thing that's confusing that I already mentioned is it's called many different names, right? Advanced recycling, chemical recycling, et cetera. And that's part one of being confusing. Part two is that those names refer to a collection of different technologies and processes. They don't refer to one thing. What they all have in common, though, is that they're using chemicals or high heat or high pressure or some combination of those things to dissolve or break down plastic. And some of the most common types of chemical recycling technologies are called pyrolysis or gasification or solvolysis. So they have these different technical names, but again, they're all using some form of chemicals or high heat or high pressure or a combination to dissolve or break down plastic.
It's not really recycling, though. They're not taking something and turning it into another thing of that same type, right? So using the word recycling is quite misleading, right?
It's a really good point, Doug, that the most common technology that is called chemical recycling is pyrolysis. And very often, pyrolysis is not generating new plastic or new plastic products. It's generating fuels or chemicals that might be used for other purposes. So in many cases, calling it chemical recycling, the recycling is sort of misleading or a misnomer. Turning materials into fuel is not recycling,
Yeah.
because the benefits of recycling come when you return materials to the production cycle. And that takes the pressure off of needing to extract more virgin resources. So you
Exactly.
can think
Yeah.
about paper, for example, right? You need trees to make paper. And if you recycle that paper, then you don't need to log more trees to make new paper. You're returning the paper to the production cycle. Now, if you burn that paper, even if you might generate some energy in the process, you lose all the benefits of recycling. That paper is gone. and you must then cut more trees to make more paper. It's the same for plastic. If you destroy the material by incineration or burning or making it into a fuel, you must extract more fossil fuels to make more plastic. So it's a big concern, again, around the most common type of chemical recycling technology, pyrolysis, that it's very often not creating anything that's recycled or that's going to make new plastic.
Yeah, so once you burn it, it's out of the recycling system, right? It's not part of the recycling cycle.
So, there's some claims of companies or projects using pyrolysis that are saying, no, we're not making fuels. That's not what we're doing. The products that we're creating out of the pyrolysis are going to be used to make new plastic or make useful products. We're not going to burn it. Sounds promising, right? But as what comes out of plastic pyrolysis is this pyrolysis oil that is quite contaminated and just a soup mixture of all kinds of things and toxic chemicals. And it needs many, many steps of purification before it can be used for anything. So it's quite energy and resource intensive. And then even then, it's kind of so contaminated and of unknown composition that it has to be mixed with a bunch of virgin fossil fuel products to be useful, because it's not pure enough or defined enough to use. Like, you could never take 100% pyrolysis oil and put it into a process and use it to make new plastic. You have to have these virgin fossil inputs to dilute out a lot of the contamination. So even in the projects where they're saying we're not making fuels, there's still a lot of concerns around the fact that you can never have 100% recycled plastic made from a pyrolysis product. It's not technically possible.
There's no abracadabra formula that's going to magically get rid of the toxic chemicals that were used in the making of the plastic anyway, right? I mean, there's no magic way to extract that to get those out.
When we're talking about recycling or management or processing of plastics of any sort, the fact that there's a lot of toxic chemicals that are in plastics makes the management very difficult. So I like to say, there's the saying garbage in, garbage out. With plastics, it's toxics in, toxics out. They don't magically disappear. Whether you're mechanically recycling or trying to chemically recycle or incinerate, dumping them in a landfill, the toxic chemicals go somewhere, right? So that's one of the main issues with plastic is we got to get these toxic chemicals out if we're going to try to manage it better.
Can I get very specific and ask you about artificial turf fields? I mean, we are installing more and more of these. They have a lifespan of 7 to 10 years. And at the end of that, they are cut up into sections and rolled up and sometimes stored on farmland where they pay farmers a minimal amount to leave them there. But there are now all these new companies out there that are going to be recycling them. They're very excited that they can recycle artificial turf. Well, when you think about how many different types of plastics there are, and then you think about the infill material, especially if it's ground up tires, you've got a lot of plastics in them as well, with all their chemicals, as well as other chemicals that are not plastic. I don't know what kind of information you have about a specific product like that, but it would be very useful to hear about that, because a lot of people are concerned about the health effects of their kids playing on these fields, and then what happens to them. Are there more health effects down the road when they try to recycle them?
Yes, I would say the concerns about trying to chemically recycle artificial turf are the same as what I've been saying, that there's a lot of toxic chemicals and additives to plastics. Artificial turf is no exception. And when you put that into something like a pyrolysis process, you're going to get those toxic chemicals coming out somewhere. And what we see is it comes out in the products in the pyrolysis oil, it's emitted as toxic air pollution and it comes out as hazardous waste. So a number of the pyrolysis facilities I've looked at in the US are large quantity hazardous waste generators. So that's an EPA designation. That means they generate more than a certain amount of hazardous waste every month. It's in the thousands of pounds. So a number of these facilities, they've generated hundreds of thousands of pounds of hazardous waste over the years. And hazardous waste is a problem certainly for where it's generated, because there can be spills, releases, explosions, but then also the hazardous waste is typically transported many hundreds of miles to hazardous waste incineration facilities, which then those communities are exposed to pollution from the incineration. And it's also a hazard in transportation. I think we all recall the East Palestine Ohio train derailment incident. You know what can happen when there's spills of highly toxic and flammable chemicals. So I'd say it's pyrolysis or chemical recycling of artificial turf is of concern, just like any other plastic material.
So these artificial turf fields and all their plastic components and all the chemicals that are used of flame retardants and PFAS and everything else, they go to a pyrolysis plant, right, where they are quote unquote being recycled, burning them, right? And then what comes out of that is hazardous waste at the end of the process. And then they are shipped to be burned again.
Exactly right. Exactly right. I'll also note that the pyrolysis process itself is quite energy intensive. So it requires high heat and pressure. And in order to generate the energy to maintain those conditions, oftentimes to start it, to get it going, you burn fossil fuels, quite often fossil gas, but then to keep the reaction going, you burn the products of the process. So plastic goes in, it's getting heated up, broken down, and a lot of those gases get burned in the pyrolysis process just to power the process. So this is yet another reason that it does not fit many definitions of recycling, because a number of definitions of recycling have a requirement for the efficiency of the process, that the material loss within the process must be low. Otherwise, you can't really call it recycling, because you're losing so much material in the process, right? So in pyrolysis, you can lose anywhere from 50 to 70% of the material because you're burning the gases to power the process.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Are you optimistic? Do you sleep at night? Do you worry about this?
It's challenging times we're living in, and I would say it probably depend on when you ask me, but overall, I'm an optimist by nature. I couldn't do this work without it. Sure. And what I'm optimistic about is the power of communities and people to come together to demand change and to use our collective agency and will to create the transformative change that we need. I'm always so inspired by the community partners I work with and their dedication and tenacity and desire to change things for the better, for their families, for themselves, for their communities. And it might not seem like it at the moment, but I do believe that we can build the people power that we need to change this situation and improve the health of the environment and the health of all of us.
Dr. Veena Singla, Adjunct Assistant Professor of Environmental Health at the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University here in New York. You can learn more about Dr. Singla and listen to this show or any of our previous shows on our website, greenstreetnews.org. I'm Doug Wood. Patti and I will be back next week with another edition of Green Street. Thanks for listening.